Good afternoon. Apparently that's the way I start every show, by putting my glasses back up on my eye. So some people have noticed. Anyway, I'm Dr. Terry James Gingrass. This is Dr. G's ADHD Chat. This is a program that tries to make the world safe for ADHDers. I'm a clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist in private practice. I've been doing that for a lot of years, and a lot of my practice is ADHD, both kids and adults. And I think probably the hardest part for people with ADHD is just how to survive. I mean, it's not easy. You've got something that half the people in your life don't even believe exists. There are no obvious signs of it, except you act like you don't have much control sometimes, because sometimes you don't have much control. It's definitely a challenge, and it's only made worse by the fact that our schools are totally not designed for people with ADHD. Even with so-called accommodations, they're really not designed for an ADHD person. And compound that by a lot of parents being resistant to appropriately treat or effectively treat ADHD. And it's mostly out of fear. I mean, it's just like, oh my God, I don't want to put him on medication for the rest of his life kind of thing. Unfortunately, that's kind of what's really needed. You know, the old argument is, well, if he had diabetes, you'd put him on insulin for the rest of his life, wouldn't you? And there you have it. But it doesn't, it's just attention, right? That is a terrible, terrible name, because it doesn't even come close to covering all the potential difficulties associated with ADHD. They're way more than just attention problems, and they are the kind of things that, frankly, cause an individual a lot of trouble. In my practice, I see tons of adults, most of them in their late 20s to early 30s, who have either never been diagnosed or were diagnosed but never got properly treated for one reason or another. These folks are some of the saddest, most unhappy, and most anxious people you ever want to meet. And most of them have been in treatment for anxiety or depression, well, at least since they left home. Okay? And it's a very frustrating thing to know that had they been treated for their attention problems early, the other problems may never have developed. Okay, that's why I wanted to talk this week a little bit about emotions, because there's a high incidence of anxiety and or depression in the ADHD population. And if you think about it, it's kind of to be expected. I mean, understand, there are lots of people who will argue that emotions are things that are somehow genetically determined. And I will tell you that there's absolutely no research that supports that. The research suggests there's an arousal level that we tend to inherit. And even that may be a learned behavior. The famous Norwegian stoicism or Italian hyper stuff. But we don't really know if those are actually determined by genes, or are they just that everybody in the given culture acts a certain way and that's what's expected and that's what's trained. Okay, generally speaking, emotions are learned. We learn from watching our parents. We learn from the way our parents treat us. We learn from our experiences growing up. There's not a whole lot about it that seems like it's got anything to do with genetic predisposition. But you think about being an ADHD kid, not knowing that you've got ADHD, and you go to school, and all of a sudden, you know, it's not a matter of riding your bicycle around the neighborhood all day or, you know, whatever you have been doing. You're supposed to sit still. And you're supposed to sit still for hours. And you're not supposed to talk to anybody. And you're supposed to do all this work. And most of that work is not very interesting. So what do? You have an attention system that isn't particularly compliant, you know, that doesn't work because people order you to do things. It works because you're interested in things. So what happens? Well, depending on the teacher, but probably you get into trouble. You know, you don't get the smiley face or the green color, you get the yellow, and then you get the red color, or you get the frowny face, or whatever they're using. But you're always under the gun, if you will. You're always getting negative feedback. And you do that for years and years and years, and you start thinking that's you. You're the person that the teacher always yelled at. You're the person who always got into trouble. You're the person who always got sent to the principal. And from that, you start drawing conclusions about yourself. Well, what are people who get into trouble? What are they? What are they like? They're probably, maybe they're bad people. Or maybe they're just people who can't do anything right. Or maybe they're people who should be kept away from other people. I mean, it goes on and on and on, okay? But the important thing is that you're well on the way to developing a negative self-image. And a negative self-image will lead you to either be depressed or anxious or both, okay? The major emotions, they have a cognitive focus. That is a way of thinking that tends to make us more prone to a given emotion. Like, for instance, depression. There's something wrong with me. There's always going to be something wrong with me, and there's nothing I can do to fix it. Boom, that's depression. Anxiety, something terrible is going to happen. I'm not sure when it's going to happen, but it's going to be bad, and I'm not going to like it. Okay? Now, for an ADHDer, that happens the first week in school where something bad happens they weren't expecting. And that's why for a lot of kids, the teacher you have is so important. You cannot emphasize that enough. The teacher is terribly important. Over the years, I've had an opportunity to review people's report cards, so kids' report cards from, first grade up. And it is amazing. Some years, they look perfect. I mean, wow, this is a sharp kid doing well in school. And the next year, poof, they're a train wreck. It's the teacher. Okay, some teachers know how to handle ADHD kids. Some teachers are more entertaining. And some teachers are angry, strict disciplinarians. And those folks don't tend to do real well with ADHD kids. Okay, so all the major emotions, there's a cognitive component. The cognitive component is mostly learned. It is not typically consciously learned. You just sort of think that's the way the world is. The next part is the affective component, and that's the emotion. What do you? I feel sad. I feel angry. I feel scared. Those are the main emotions. And then there's a physiological component, and a lot of people misunderstand this. Your brain, believe it or not, although we try to separate it in the insurance industry, the brain is connected to the body. And everything that happens in your brain is reflected in your body. And the other way around. When something happens to your body, it changes the way you think about things. This should not be a surprise. Because, after all, we're carrying the equipment with us all the time. But we've got this hard to explain separation between mind and body. And it is totally ridiculous. And it leads to a lot of extra evaluations, extra x-rays, MRIs, CAT scans, extra testing, because people don't see that one impacts the other. With ADHD, you are going to have certain predictable kinds of difficulties. And those difficulties are going to cause you to get into some trouble sometimes. And when you get into some trouble, your body reacts to that. And if you're doing it frequently enough, eventually you'll probably develop some kind of a pseudo symptom. I mean, it's a real symptom, but it's caused typically because you're always scared. You're always afraid that you're going to get into trouble. You're just thinking, I'm worthless. There's nothing I can do right. All of those things have an impact on your body. And that's why I see a lot of kids with headache problems or stomach ache problems, or, it's mostly just about the thoughts, the feelings lead to chronic arousal, leading to symptoms. It's pretty logical, we've known about this for a very long time. But that's why there are physiological responses to the emotions. Don't want to get into this too much, but I see a lot of people. And most of the time, the emotional state is leading to the physical symptoms. Sometimes, sure. People do get sick, and there are real illnesses, pain situations that are primarily physical, but not nearly as many as we're treating, okay? So if you got a kid goes from running around in the backyard doing what he or she wants to do to sitting in school for 6 hours every day, and they have ADHD, which means that every day is an exercise in endurance, having to sit still, having to try to pay attention, having to try to behave. Okay, if you are, say you have a teacher who's a yeller, and she's screaming at you all the time, well, that's going to lead to anxiety. I know I'm going to screw up. I know it's going to be bad if I do, and I don't have any control over it. So I'm out of control. I'm anxious. Okay, and we see that all the time with ADHDers. And the other side of the thing is, after a few years, usually, they start thinking, geez, everybody else has an easier time in school than I do. I'm always getting into trouble. The teacher's always saying if I just pay attention, I could do better. There's something wrong with me. Something's not right. I'm not as good as everybody else. leading to one of my favorite books about ADHD. You mean I'm not lazy, crazy, or stupid? Because guess what? That's what kids get taught. That's good. What they get told continuously. There's something wrong with you. If you just pay attention, you do well as anybody else. What's the matter with you? Why aren't you paying attention? And that message is presented with more or less emotional ferocity, depending on how angry your teacher / parent / coach is. So, kiddos, take away some pretty negative messages from interactions with adults and the adult systems. And it's not really primarily that they're anxious or depressed. It's the ADHD beforehand that nobody has bothered to treat or evaluate even, or is too scared to treat once the diagnosis is made. I cannot tell you how many phone calls I get from people going, well, he was diagnosed with ADHD, but he's never been on medication, and I don't know, I think maybe there's something else wrong. Well, no, he's just trying to make it through the school system with ADHD that's untreated, and predictably, it gets worse and worse as you go on, because the system gets more demanding on exactly the kind of things you're not very good at, which is like organization, time management, that kind of stuff. And you start thinking worse and worse about yourself. I know it sounds probably obvious about what should be done, but I mean, my office got a call this week. Exactly that situation. And if it were the only one, whoa. But it wasn't the only one. And it's never been the only one. We've always had multiples of these. Or I see a 28-year-old guy who's had, 3 serious relationships that have both gone down the toilet, and he's working a minimum wage job, and he's probably going to get fired from that one. And I was diagnosed when I was in 2nd grade. But my parents didn't want to put me on medication. So here we are. Okay, so while the emotional part of ADHD, while anxiety and depression sometimes are so frequent that they seem like they're a natural part of ADHD, they're really not. Okay? They develop because you're sitting there, you're in a situation and a system that's not designed for you, and you're told nothing. You just have to adapt and adjust the best you can. Guess what? People get anxious, people get depressed. Okay, I am done. And that became a bit of a harangue. And sorry about that, but I hate waste, and I hate the lack of logic, and basically scientific reasoning that goes into the way some ADHD kids, or a lot of ADHD kids, are treated. So, I'm Dr. Terry James Gingras. This is Dr. G's ADHD Chat. I'm available. My website is terrygingrasphd.com. You can give me a message, comment somewhere around this, and if you got something you'd like me to talk about, please make a comment, and I'll try to get to it. Alrighty, we will catch you next time. Remember, we're trying to make the world safe for ADHD, because ADHDers are outside the box thinkers, and those are the folks who solve the big problems in the world. Catch you next time.